At exactly 9 a.m., the peace of my farm was shattered by the sound of police sirens. I was handcuffed, face down on the hot hood of a car because of a body I had never seen before. But the real shock did not come from the arrest warrant, but from my own family. As I was being led across the porch, Hank, my son-in-law, was still standing there calmly drinking coffee. He walked over, not to ask questions, but to whisper in my ear with a cold smile. "I warned you, old man. You should have obediently handed over the land title and gone to a nursing home. Now enjoy the rest of your life in prison. This farm is finally mine." He had planned it all. I had not only lost my freedom, I had just realized that I had raised a demon in my house. I guess 99% of you will hear this. Sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you? And where are you listening? 8 o'clock in the morning. The Montana air still held the chill of the night before, clinging to the wood of my porch. I sat there, my old hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug with the faded Big Sky Diner logo, trying to find some warmth in the thick black coffee inside. Before me, the Whispering Pines Ranch stretched out, the ancient pines Martha and I had planted 40 years earlier, towering against the gray sky. Martha. It had been 5 years since she'd left me alone with this property, but I could still smell the cinnamon apple pie she baked every Sunday morning. We'd built this place from scratch, every fence and every barn soaked in our sweat and blood. Whispering Pines was more than land. It was our life. But now, at 72, sitting in the same rocking chair, I felt like an intruder. That fragile peace was shattered by the deafening sound of tires crunching gravel. A shiny new Range Rover SUV, completely out of place in the dusty landscape of the farm, screeched to a halt right in front of the door. Hank got out. My son-in-law. He wore a crisp Italian suit, his patent leather shoes never stained with the dust of the area. He looked at his watch, a large Rolex that I knew he had bought with the money from the mortgage on part of the farm last year. "Dad!" Hank called, his tone not a greeting, but a tone of undisguised annoyance. He stepped onto the porch, not looking me in the eye. "Are you sitting here in a daze again? How many times have I told you, this cold wind is not good for your age?" I didn't answer, just sipped my bitter coffee. I was old, but I wasn't senile. I heard the calculation in that feigned concern. "I was thinking," Hank continued, scrolling through his phone, "the Golden Horizon nursing home across town just opened a new wing. It's high-end. There are nurses on duty 24/7. You'll be safer there than being alone in this godforsaken place." Safe. He always used that word. But I knew what he really thought. He saw me as an old, bulky piece of furniture, taking up space in his grand asset optimization scheme. He wanted to turn Whispering Pines into a resort for the rich, and my presence was an eyesore. "I'm fine, Hank," I said, my voice hoarse from lack of use. "This is my home." Hank paused. He looked up, looking at me with a strange half-smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Dad," he said, his voice light but colder than the morning wind. "But don't worry. Everything is about to change. Soon." He turned and walked away, leaving me with a chill running down my spine. At that time, I still didn't understand the meaning of that smile. All I knew was that, as I watched his car disappear around the hill, I realized a bitter truth. I was no longer the owner of this house. I was just a troublesome ghost haunting it, and they were looking for an exorcist to get rid of me. And they had already prepared the exorcism just an hour away. 9 o'clock, sharp. I just set my empty ceramic mug down on the porch when my world exploded. Not a literal explosion, but a sound that tore through the sacred silence of Montana. A shrill, savage siren. 3 county sheriff's patrol cars, shiny black SUVs they'd bought last year with our tax money, roared through the front gate. A cloud of red dust billowed up, obscuring the distant mountains. They braked sharply in front of me, forming a menacing semicircle. I stood up, my knees shaking a little, not from fear, but from surprise. "What's going on, guys?" I tried to call out, but the person who stepped out of the lead car was Bronson, Sheriff Bronson, the man I'd shaken hands with at the county cattle fair just a week ago. But today, his eyes were unfamiliar. They were as cold and hard as granite. "Arthur Pendleton," he roared, his hand already on the holster at his hip. "Freeze! Put your hands up!" I was stunned. Toby, what the hell are you doing?" Before I could finish, two young deputies rushed over. They didn't see me as a 72-year-old man. They saw me as a threat. One of them twisted my arms behind my back so hard I heard my old shoulder joints crack. "Ouch! Go easy!" I screamed in pain. The handcuffs tightened on my wrists, cold and sharp. But Bronson's next move was what killed me. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt and pushed me face down onto the hot hood of the patrol car. The heat from the engine burned through my thin shirt, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation. I tilted my head and saw Mrs. Mayer next door, standing frozen against the fence, her hand over her mouth in horror. "Arthur Pendleton, you're under arrest for first-degree murder," Bronson read me Miranda writes in a monotone, robotic voice. "Murder? Who? You're crazy!" I screamed, dirt covering one cheek. "Jerry O'Connell," Bronson whispered, leaning down, his breath smelling of fake mint. "We just found him dead in the creek south, shot twice in the chest." Jerry? My loyal old manager who'd worked for me for 20 years? Impossible. "I didn't do it. I haven't seen him in a week." "Really?" Bronson smirked. He signaled to his subordinates. It took less than 5 minutes. A deputy came running out from behind the old barn, the haystack I hadn't been to in a month because of back pain. In his hand was a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was a striped flannel shirt covered in dried blood, and a Colt 1911, my gun, the one I always kept in my safe. "You seem to have forgotten a lot, Arthur," Bronson said triumphantly. They picked me up and pushed me toward the back of the squad car. My mind was spinning. It had all happened so fast, so perfectly, like a well-rehearsed play. As they forced my head into the car, I looked up at the porch one last time. Hank was there. He was leaning against the porch post, hands in the pockets of his expensive suit, calmly watching his father-in-law being treated like an animal. He didn't look surprised, not even a little shocked. When our eyes met, he just nodded to Bronson. It was a very small nod, but to me it felt like a hammer hammering on my own coffin. The car door slammed shut, trapping me in a world of cheap vinyl and despair. I was trapped. A cruelly perfect trap. They stripped me of my dignity not with a baton, but with cold formalities. At the county jail, I was forced to strip, standing shivering under the pale fluorescent lights, while a young guard, old enough to be my grandson, searched the most private parts of my old body. The humiliation was more chilling than the cold of the 4 concrete walls. Then came the fingerprinting. Black ink stuck to the calluses on my hands, hands that had spent their lives holding plows and hoes, now stained with the marks of crime. When they took my profile photo, I looked into the lens, but I didn't recognize the gaunt, old man in the reflection. It wasn't Arthur Pendleton, owner of Whispering Pines. It was inmate 49201. They put me in a holding cell that smelled of cheap bleach and stale sweat. I was allowed to make one phone call. With trembling fingers, I dialed my daughter's number. Beep, 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 beep. No answer, just cold voicemail. I called again. Same thing. The silence on the other end of the line was like a second death sentence. 2 hours later, a warden called my name. "Pendleton, visitor." My heart jumped. It was her. Surely my daughter had gotten the message. Or maybe it was the family lawyer. I trudged out to the visiting room, handcuffed, but with a glimmer of hope for bail. But sitting on the other side of the thick, bulletproof glass was not my daughter. It was Hank. She sat there, immaculate in her charcoal suit, a stark contrast to my wrinkled orange prison uniform. She didn't look worried or distressed. He was even tapping his fingers on the stainless steel table, as if he were waiting for a latte rather than looking at his father-in-law in prison. "Hank," I said hoarsely into the intercom, "thank God you're here. I have to get you out of here. There's been a terrible mistake." Hank laughed, a short, dry laugh, cutting off my plea. "A mistake?" He leaned forward, elbows on the table. The smile on his lips didn't fade, but his eyes were cold as a reptile's. "Old man, I told you, you should have gone to the Golden Horizon nursing home like I arranged. There are nurses, there's porridge, and most importantly, there are walls to keep you away from adult business." I was stunned, the phone almost slipping from my hand. "What? What are you talking about?" "Now look at you," he smacked his lips, feigning pity. "You'll die in this concrete cage, Arthur, but don't worry about Whispering Pines. I'll sell it. A resort corporation is desperate for land. That money, well, I'll take some of it to cover your legal fees, as a last token of my filial piety. Every word it spoke was like a dagger stabbing into my heart. There was no mistake. It was all a trap. It didn't just want to take my land. It wanted to erase my existence from the outside world, bury me in this rotten legal system so it could freely tear apart the legacy my wife and I had spent our lives building. "You're a devil," I whispered, tears of resentment welling up in my eyes. Hank stood up, adjusting the buttons on his vest. Before hanging up, he leaned close to the glass, his voice a snake whisper. "Jerry knows too much, Arthur. He pries into places he shouldn't. And you've lived too long." He turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the cold visiting room, with the horrible truth choking my throat. I wasn't just the victim of a scam. I was the scapegoat for a crime my son-in-law had committed. I thought prison was the worst place, but I was wrong. The loneliness of being turned away from the world was hell. "I want to see my lawyer," I rapped on the bars, trying to maintain my dignity. "Call Mr. Miller. Now." Miller had been my family lawyer for 30 years. He'd drawn up Martha's will, helped me transfer the first parcels of land. He'd know this was a farce. But Bronson just sauntered over, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, the aroma a tantalizing reminder of my thirst for freedom. "Miller won't come, Arthur," he said, his voice slurred. "His office called this morning. They said, your family, specifically your son-in-law, who has temporary custody of your assets due to your mental instability, has terminated their contract. He doesn't want anything to do with a murderer." Hank. He was not one step ahead of me, but 10. Instead of Miller, I got Sarah. She was a young public defender who walked into the interrogation room 30 minutes late with a thick stack of files that were about to fall out of her hands. She looked even more exhausted than I did, with deep circles under her eyes and a cheap, rumpled jacket. "Listen, Mr. Pendleton," she said, without looking me in the eye, rustling through the files. "I have 40 other cases pending. The evidence against you is solid. Your gun, your shirt, your fingerprints. The DA is offering a deal." "Deal? I'm innocent?" "They all say that," she sighed, the tired sigh of someone who's heard it 1,000 times. "Guilty to manslaughter. 20 years. At your age, you could get parole after 10 years if you behave well." 10 years? At 72, what difference would 20 or 10 years make to the death penalty? "I want my own lawyer," I growled, slamming my hand on the cold metal table. "I have money. I have a farm." Sarah finally looked up at me. Her eyes held no sympathy, only cold pity. "Didn't you know? All your accounts at Bozeman First National Bank were frozen this morning. Federal warrant. There's a charge of money laundering through cattle transactions." I froze. "Money laundering." Hank again. "It didn't just want to put me in jail for murder. It wanted to tarnish my entire business reputation, cut off any resources I could use to fight back." I slumped into my chair. I, Arthur Pendleton, who had built a multi-million-dollar business from scratch, didn't have $5 to make a decent phone call. I was completely helpless. Sarah packed up her files, advised me to think about the deal, and hurried off to the next case. The metal door slammed shut behind her, the sound as dry as a judge's gavel. In the desperate silence, a memory flashed. That morning when Bronson had handcuffed me, Leo, my 7-year-old grandson, he'd run to the gate. He'd picked up his new iPhone, pointed it at us. And Hank. Hank had rushed forward, not to comfort his son, but to snatch the phone away. I remember the loud crash as he slammed the camera into the gravel. I was too panicked to notice. But now I think about it. Why did he react so violently to a kid who was just filming? What did Leo see? And more importantly, did he still have it? The first night in prison wasn't like the movies. It wasn't silent. It was loud, a cacophony of snoring, delirious screaming, and the constant clanging of metal. I lay on the rock-hard bunk bed, staring at the peeling ceiling, trying to find some peace in my memory, but all I could think of was that morning. 9 o'clock, sirens, handcuffs. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like something was wrong. A nagging feeling began to creep into my mind, like when you know there's a wolf stalking a flock of sheep without even seeing it. Bronson. He'd acted too quickly, too decisively. When you arrive at a crime scene, the police usually cordon off the area, look for clues, interview witnesses. But this morning, he didn't do any of those things. He rushed straight at me, handcuffed me, and immediately ordered his men to search the area behind the old barn. Only there. How did he know? That barn was full of old dusty hay, the perfect place to hide something if you wanted it never to be found. But he went straight there like he had a treasure map, like he knew exactly where the treasure was buried. And Jerry, my loyal manager. Why did he die? Why now? Another memory flashed, razor sharp. 3 days ago, Jerry had called me, his voice trembling, worried. Boss, I need to see you. It's urgent. It's about Hank. I think you need to know. We had arranged to meet this morning at 10 o'clock, but he never made it. He was killed before he could open his mouth. A chill ran down my spine, dispelling the stifling heat of the cell. This wasn't just a property grab. This was a cover-up. Hank didn't just want my land. He wanted my silence. He was afraid of what Jerry was going to tell me. Hey, old man, a hoarse voice said from the next bed, interrupting my thoughts. It was Slick, a petty crook who'd been in and out of jail on a regular basis. He was lying there with his arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. You know what? That old Sheriff Bronson bought a brand new Ford F-150 Raptor this morning. It was bright red. I waited, silent. He paid in cash. Slick smirked a knowing smile. $50,000 is real money. Where does a sheriff in this godforsaken town get that kind of money? $50,000. Cash. The day I was captured, the picture Hank had painted of perfection began to show cracks. They thought I was old, senile. But they forgot one thing. I was a farmer. I had spent my life observing, picking up on the slightest signs of weather, of crops, of predators. And now, I smelled the wolf. Slick, I called softly, looking around cautiously to make sure none of Bronson's eyes were lurking nearby. You said you knew Bronson. What do you mean? Slick rolled over, propping his elbows on the thin pillows. He flashed his tobacco-stained teeth in a sly smile. No, I was his VIP client, old man, before he decided I was no longer useful and put me in here. He told me about his old business days. Bronson wasn't just a greedy sheriff. He was a businessman, and his trade was silence. He had a rule, Slick whispered, his eyes darting. Never take direct deposits, always cash or put into a bogus account at the Bozeman Community Bank. Account in the name of some bogus company. Sunshine Consulting or something. My heart was pounding. Cash. $50,000. The next time I met Sarah, I was no longer the passive, resigned prisoner. I leaned across the table, ignoring the warning glances of the guard in the corner. You need to check Hank's account, I said urgently. See if there was a large cash withdrawal the day I was arrested, or a transfer to Sunshine Consulting. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. Mr. Pendleton, I told you I'm not a private investigator. I'm a public defender, and I'm swamped with. You want justice, right? I interrupted, looking the young woman straight in the eye. Or do you just want to close the case? If I'm right, this isn't just murder. This is corruption. Bribery. Do you want to be the one to expose it? I saw the hesitation in her eyes. The spark of professionalism, which I feared had been extinguished by the burden of work, seemed to have been fanned a little. I'll try, she said, uncertainly. But don't get your hopes up. Financial records aren't easy to access. 3 days later, Sarah returned. She no longer had her usual tired, bored expression. Instead, there was tension, a kind of intense concentration. She sat down across from me, not opening the file right away, but placing her hand on it, taking a deep breath. You're right, she said, her voice low but clear. I asked a friend who works in auditing to look at the public transactions. Your son-in-law's construction company, HP Constructions, made an unusual cash withdrawal the very morning you were arrested. I held my breath. How much? $50,000, Sarah replied, her eyes looking at me for the first time, not with pity but with alliance. The exact figure you suspected, Arthur. We may have a clue. A tiny glimmer of light had appeared in the darkness of the prison. It wasn't enough to light the way to freedom, but it was enough to let me know I wasn't crazy. Justice might be blinded, but it wasn't completely blind, and I would do anything to open its eyes. 3 days after Sarah found the $50,000 clue, I got a strange call. It wasn't the right time to make phone calls, but a nice-looking prison guard slipped me his cell phone and whispered, Someone needs you urgently. Hello? I whispered, wary. Grandpa? It's me, Leo. His voice was shaky, scared, but also determined. I'm calling from my friend's phone. Dad, he took my phone, but, Grandpa, I backed it up. Backed up? What, Leo? What are you talking about? The video, Grandpa. The morning you were arrested. I saw Dad hand Mr. Bronson a thick envelope. I recorded it all. Dad didn't know I uploaded it to the cloud before he smashed my phone. My heart was pounding in my chest. Evidence! We have living proof. Leo, listen. I tried to keep my voice as calm as possible. You have to be careful. Don't tell your father. Find a way to get it to Sarah, my lawyer. Her number is... What the hell are you doing? Hank's shrill screams cut me off. Then came the sound of Leo banging and screaming, then the signal went dead. Leo! Leo! I screamed into the dead phone. Panic overtook me. They had found the boy. What would Hank, with his cruelty, do to his own son to protect his filthy possessions? Please, I grabbed the warden's sleeve, call my lawyer. Now! My nephew is in danger. Sarah came over immediately. When she heard me recount the call, her face paled. She drove immediately to Hank's mansion outside Bozeman. But she was too late. When Sarah returned to the prison that afternoon, her face was blank. I can't go in, Arthur, she said, her voice filled with helplessness. Hank stopped me at the gate. He has a court order prohibiting me from having any contact with his family. He threatened to sue me for harassment and lose my license if I ever returned. What about Leo? Where's my nephew? Sarah looked down, avoiding my eyes. He said, Leo was sent to a rehabilitation camp for troubled youth. This morning, right after that call. What camp? Where? He didn't say. And as the sole legal guardian, he has full authority to decide. I slumped down on the table. Rehabilitation camp. Those places were known as hell on earth, where children were disciplined with iron discipline and isolation. Hank had sent Leo away to silence him, to put him in a place where no one could hear his voice. They dare touch Leo. I gritted my teeth, tears welling up in my eyes. If anything happens to him, I will never forgive myself. I would rather die in this damn prison than let him be harmed. The hope that had just been kindled was cruelly extinguished. Not only had we lost our most important witness, but now the life of my beloved nephew was in danger. Without Leo, we had to find another way. Sarah, with incredible tenacity, returned to the beginning of it all. Jerry. I went to Jerry's old boarding house in the suburbs, she told me 2 days later, her voice still trembling with excitement and fear. The police searched it, but they did it very roughly. They only looked for what Bronson wanted them to look for. I was different. She placed a small, worn leather notebook on the table. It was Jerry's work diary. It always recorded every detail of the day. Fence repair, cattle checks, rainfall. But the last pages were different. Read this, Arthur. Sarah flipped to the highlighted page. September 14. Hank's truck was seen entering the northern prairies at midnight again, the third time this month. What were they carrying that was so sneaky? September 20. The smell of chemicals was strong in the creek near the North Meadow. The grass was dead. I followed the tire tracks. My God, he was burying barrels on the boss's land. September 23. I confronted Hank. He laughed in my face. He said if I said anything, I would disappear. I had to tell Arthur. See him on Friday. Friday, the day Jerry was killed. I read Jerry's scribbles and felt my blood boil. Hank was more than a greedy land grabber. He was a monster. His construction company, HP Constructions, had definitely been contracted to dispose of toxic waste from industrial plants, but instead of doing it properly and expensively, he chose the cheapest and most cruel way, burying it on his father-in-law's land. He poisoned my land, I whispered, my voice cracking with rage. The land Martha loved more than life itself. He wasn't just killing people, he was killing the very soul of this land. Now it was clear. Hank needed Whispering Pines for more than just a resort. He needed control of the land to ensure his dirty secret would never be discovered. Jerry had found out, and he was dead. I was the landowner, and I was the next obstacle. We have motive, Sarah said, closing the notebook. But we need more than that. We need to prove those barrels were really there. But Arthur, she hesitated, and it was then that I noticed the bandage on her hand. They know I'm investigating. Last night, when I left Jerry's motel, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse. On it were letters cut from magazines, strung together into a short, chilling message. Stop or die. They smashed my window and threw this in, Sarah said, trying to stay calm, but I could see her hands were shaking. Hank was escalating. He was ready to hurt anyone who got in his way. I looked at the young lawyer, the only one still willing to stand by me. You should stop, Sarah, I said, my heart sinking. He's not kidding. Sarah looked me straight in the eyes. The fear was still there, but there was a steel beneath it that had been tempered. No, Arthur, it's personal now. We're going to find those damn barrels. If we have to dig up the entire North Meadow. 2 a.m. The North Meadows were pitch black, lit only by a faint crescent moon. I sat in my cell, but my mind was out there, with Sarah. We had planned carefully. I had drawn a map of Whispering Pines from memory, every creek, every bush, marking the places Jerry had mentioned in his diary. The North Meadows were the most remote, the most isolated, and the most ideal place to bury dirty secrets. Sarah had hired an independent environmental expert from Billings, someone Hank couldn't bribe. They had to do it at night. Bronson had increased patrols around the ranch under the pretext of securing the scene, but we knew what he was guarding. I clenched my fists, praying. I was risking a young girl's life on my fight. If Bronson caught her... Screech, screech. The crackle of the night guard's radio startled me. I held my breath and listened. Patrol 4 reporting. No anomalies in the northern area. Over. I breathed a sigh of relief. She was safe. Outside, Sarah was crouched on the dew-damp grass. She told me later, her voice still trembling. Bronson's patrol car had passed less than 10 meters from where she was hiding. Headlights swept through the bushes where she and the specialist were taking soil samples. They had lain still, holding their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. One small sound, one glint of metal, and it would all be over. But they had. 3 days later, Sarah returned to the prison. She looked haggard, her eyes dark from lack of sleep, but there was a fire of determination burning inside. She placed a thin file on the table. Without a word, she pointed to the bolded numbers. Preliminary test results. Arsenic, lead, mercury, benzene, all at hundreds of times the acceptable level. We found it, Arthur, Sarah whispered, her voice choked with emotion. A chemical cemetery right under your farm. Hank didn't just bury a few barrels. He turned this place into a giant toxic waste dump. I looked at the numbers, and I saw more than just evidence. I saw a death sentence for my land, but also a sentence for Hank's crimes. The truth had been dug up from the ground, ugly and toxic, but it was the most powerful weapon we had at the moment. What now? I asked, feeling a new surge of power coursing through my veins. We need to get it out into the open now, Sarah said firmly, before they bury us all in it. Tin tức đến với tôi không phải qua lời nói, mà qua ánh mắt của Sarah khi cô ấy bước vào phòng thẩm gặp. Lần đầu tiên kể từ khi nhận vụ án này, đôi mắt cô ấy sáng lên, lấp lánh một niềm hy vọng không thể che giấu. Anh ấy về rồi, Arthur, cô thì thào, giọng run lên vì xúc động. Leo đã về. Tôi bật khóc. Ngay tại đó, trước mắt viên cai ngục, tôi gục đầu xuống bàn và khóc như một đứa trẻ. Cháu tôi còn sống. Nó đã thoát khỏi nanh vuốt của Hank. Sarah kể lại cho tôi nghe về cuộc gặp gỡ. Leo đã xuất hiện trước cửa văn phòng cô ấy vào lúc nửa đêm hôm qua, kiệt sức, đói lả, quần áo rách rưới và dính đầy bùn đất. Thằng bé đã trốn khỏi cái trại hè địa ngục đó ở tận Idaho, đi nhờ xe tải, ngủ bờ ngủ bụi suốt 3 ngày để về được đến đây. Nhưng nó không trở về tay không. Từ trong lớp lót giày rách nát, Leo lôi ra một chiếc điện thoại cũ kỹ, màn hình nứt toác. Đó là chiếc điện thoại dự phòng mà nó đã lén giấu đi trước khi bị Hank tịch thu mọi thứ. Ông Arthur, ông sẽ không tin được đâu, Sarah nói. Tay run run lấy ra một chiếc máy tính bảng. Cô ấy nhấn nút phát. Trên màn hình nhỏ, hình ảnh rung lắc nhưng rõ nét. 9 giờ sáng hôm đó, góc quay từ bụi cây gần cổng trang trại. Hank đang đứng đó, tay đưa một phong bì dày cộm cho Bronson. Và âm thanh, dù lẫn tiếng gió, nhưng giọng nói của Hank vẫn rõ mồn một, lạnh lùng và tàn nhẫn. Xử lý lão già và thằng Jerry đi. Gọn gàng vào, rồi cái trang trại này sẽ là của chúng ta. Tôi nhìn chăm chăm vào màn hình, cảm thấy một luồng điện chạy dọc sống lưng. Đây rồi, bằng chứng vàng, không phải suy đoán, không phải manh mối gián tiếp. Đây là lời thú tội trực tiếp của kẻ chủ mưu. Thằng bé đã làm được, tôi thì thào. Lòng tràn ngập niềm tự hào xen lẫn đau đớn. Dòng máu kiên cường của nhà Pendleton vẫn chảy trong huyết quản nó. Nó dũng cảm hơn cả tôi. Sarah đã ngay lập tức sao chép đoạn video ra nhiều bản, gửi lên đám mây và chuẩn bị hồ sơ để nộp thẳng lên tòa án tiểu bang, vượt qua thẩm quyền thối nát của Bronson. Chúng tôi sắp lật ngược thế cờ, nhưng niềm vui ngắn chẳng tay gang. Khuôn mặt Sarah đanh lại khi cô ấy cất máy tính bảng đi. Có một vấn đề, Arthur. Hank đã biết Leo trốn thoát. Hắn đang điên cuồng truy lùng thằng bé. Hắn đã báo cảnh sát rằng Leo là trẻ vị thành niên bỏ nhà đi bụi, có vấn đề về tâm thần và có thể gây nguy hiểm cho người khác. Cả lực lượng của Bronson đang lùng sục khắp nơi. Tim tôi lại thắt lại. Chúng tôi có bằng chứng, nhưng nhân chứng quan trọng nhất đang bị săn đuổi như một con thú. Cuộc đua bây giờ không chỉ là vì tự do của tôi nữa. Nó là cuộc đua để cứu mạng sống của Leo. The hope Leo's call had sparked was quickly crushed by a cold storm of reality. Hank and Bronson weren't sitting around waiting to die. They were striking back, and they were playing dirtier than anyone I'd ever known. Sarah came to me that afternoon, her face pale, her eyes dark from lack of sleep and fear. They've put out a statewide warrant for Leo, she said, her voice shaking. Bronson calls it a welfare check for runaway minors. He says Leo is mentally unstable and a danger to himself and others. He's called out every patrol unit. If they find him before we do, she didn't need to finish. If Bronson found Leo, the evidence would be gone, and maybe the boy too. That's not all, Arthur, Sarah continued, gripping the edge of the metal table. My office was raided this morning. No warrant. They said they had an anonymous tip about drug possession. They ransacked everything, smashed my computer. A copy of the video? I asked, my heart sinking. It's safe. I hid it somewhere they wouldn't expect. But Arthur, they're desperate, and desperate people are dangerous. That danger became apparent as soon as Sarah left. Hank arrived. This time he didn't sit down. He stood on the other side of the glass, looking at me with the arrogant look of someone who holds the reins. Father-in-law, he said, his voice soft but venomous. I hear Leo's playing hide and seek. It's dangerous. Kids wandering around alone are prone to accidents. Like poor Jerry. I lunged at the glass, but was held back by handcuffs. If you touch a hair on his head... Shh, he put a finger to his lips. The decision is yours, Arthur. Tomorrow, at trial, you have two choices. One is to continue this stupid game and see how long my son, your precious grandson, can survive out there. Two is to plead guilty, admit everything, go quietly to prison, and I'll make sure Leo is found, safe, and sent to the best boarding school in Switzerland. He tilted his head, smiling. Your freedom in exchange for his life. A bargain, isn't it? He walked away, leaving me numb in the visiting room. This terrible choice was tearing me apart. I could endure prison, I could endure humiliation, but I couldn't let him kill Leo like he did Jerry. Martha would never forgive me if I let that happen. That night was the longest night of my life. I lay on the metal cot, staring into the darkness. The trial began tomorrow. Sarah hadn't called since the office raid. The silence in the prison wasn't peace, but the eerie calm before a storm. I didn't know if I would walk into court tomorrow as an innocent man fighting for justice, or a death row inmate walking to the scaffold to save his nephew. The news hit me like a punch in the gut, knocking me right there in my cell. Sarah told me through the visiting glass, her voice shaking, unable to hide her despair. Leo had tried. He was braver than anyone I had ever known. He had disguised himself, his cap pulled down low, his oversized coat, and had made his way through the crowd of reporters surrounding the Gallatin County Courthouse. He had spotted Sarah waiting at the security gate, her eyes scanning the crowd anxiously. Only 10 meters to go, 10 meters to get the truth out. But Bronson was one step ahead. Just as Leo was about to rush forward, 2 plainclothes officers appeared from nowhere. They crushed the boy to the cold pavement, merciless. "We got you! Runaway juvenile!" one of them shouted, drowning out Leo's cries for help. Sarah had tried to intervene, but was stopped by Hank's signed arrest warrant. And then Bronson appeared. He leisurely walked over and snatched the old battered phone from Leo's hand. "Ah, here's the important evidence," he smirked, the smile of a vulture who had just found a rotten carcass. Don't worry, kid. I'll keep it safe. Very safe. He winked at Sarah before turning and walking away, leaving her standing there, helplessly watching Leo being dragged away like a dangerous criminal. He got the boy, I whispered, my mind reeling. He took away my last hope. God, I was wrong to drag him into this. I should have told him to run far away. Remorse and despair overwhelmed me. I had lost my wife, my home, and now I was about to lose my only grandchild because of my own stupidity. But Arthur, Sarah said, her voice suddenly urgent, pulling me out of my despair. Leo yelled something before he was put in the car. Something strange. I looked up, met her eyes. He yelled, The cloud! The password is Grandma's birthday. The cloud? Martha's birthday? I froze. Leo, he was smarter than I thought. He didn't just keep the video on his phone. He had a backup plan. Grandma's birthday, I muttered, a glimmer of hope returning. The 12th of April, 1952. Sarah, we have to find that cloud. Now. Courtroom 4 of the Gallatin County Courthouse was packed. I sat in the glass cage, feeling like an exotic animal on display. Hank sat in the front row, right behind the prosecution. He wore a jet-black suit and dark tie, his face the sad, stoic expression of a dutiful son-in-law witnessing a family tragedy. A perfect performance. The trial began. Without Leo's video, Sarah was like a soldier going into battle without a gun. She fought bravely, but in vain. The prosecutor, a man with a stern face and a steely voice, presented the evidence one by one. My Colt 1911 with its clear fingerprints. The blood-stained shirt found behind my barn. Your Honor, Sarah stood, her voice trembling but determined. The defendant asserts that this evidence was planted. We have reason to believe that the victim, Jerry O'Connell, was murdered because he discovered a large-scale toxic spill on the defendant's property. This incident is directly related to the defendant's son-in-law's company. Objection, the prosecutor roared. Baseless speculation. The defense is trying to distract from this barbaric murder with wild conspiracy theories. Judge Davies, whom I knew had gone fishing with Hank a few times, banged his gavel loudly. Objection accepted. Attorney Sarah, if you do not have direct evidence linking this theory to the case, I ask you to stop smearing others. Sarah sat down, her face red with anger and helplessness. I looked at Hank. He was looking at me, and for a brief moment when no one was looking, the corners of his mouth lifted into a secret, triumphant smile. He knew he had won. Then came the climax. Hank asked permission to speak. He stood up, walked slowly to the witness stand, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped away a tear, which I was sure was fake. Your Honor, his voice trembled, filled with emotion. My father-in-law, he's not a bad man. He's just old, crazy. Sometimes he doesn't know what he's doing. I tried to get him into a nursing home so he could get better care, but maybe I'm too late. Please show him mercy. The courtroom murmured sympathetically. They looked at him like a saint, and at me like a crazy, dangerous old man. I clenched my fists on the back of my chair. His every word felt like a poisoned knife. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was nailing me to the coffin he'd painstakingly prepared. He was acting out a perfect play, and I was the villain he'd written. The 15-minute break before my final testimony felt like an eternity. In the corner of the lawyer's office, I found Sarah furiously typing on her old laptop. Sweat beaded her forehead. No, she hissed softly, tapping her fingers on the keyboard. The courthouse public Wi-Fi blocks access to cloud storage services. They've thought about this. Use your phone, I whispered through the bars of the holding area. Sarah pulled out her phone. No signal. Absolutely no signal. Damn it, Bronson must have installed jammers around here. We were isolated, right in the center of justice, blindfolded, earplugs, and handcuffs. The silence of our electronic devices was more terrifying than the noise of the courtroom. It was the silence of approaching death. At that moment, Hank approached the holding area. He pretended to go to the bathroom, but stopped right next to the bars where Saturday. No one paid any attention to us. Listen, old man, he whispered, not looking at me, but straight ahead. Leo is in my hands. He's a stubborn kid, and in the reform camp, stubborn kids are prone to accidents. Suicide, for example. My heart stopped. You. Admit it, he interrupted, his voice cold. Admit it now, and I'll make sure he gets out tomorrow, safe and sound. If you try to force it, I swear you'll have to bury another family member. He walked away, leaving me with the most devastating choice of my life. I looked at Sarah, who was still desperately searching for a cell phone signal. I looked out the window, where the sky of freedom was divided by the bars. I had lost Martha. I was about to lose Whispering Pines. I couldn't lose Leo. He was all I had left of my daughter, of this family. I have to surrender, I told myself, feeling my soul shatter. Sorry, Martha. Sorry, Leo. You have no choice. The bell rang to end the recess. The trial continues. Judge Davies banged his gavel. He looked down at me through his thick glasses. Defendant Arthur Pendleton, before the court deliberates, do you wish to change your original statement? The courtroom fell silent. All eyes were on me. I saw Hank staring at me, his hands in his pockets where I knew he held Leo's fate. I stood up shakily. My legs felt like lead. I took a deep breath, preparing to say the word that would end my freedom forever. Yes, Your Honor. I wish to... The words caught in my throat, dry and bitter as ashes. The entire courtroom held its breath. I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on me, but I could only see one person. Hank. He sat in the front row, leaning forward like a vulture waiting for the carrion feast to begin. In those cold eyes I saw cruel triumph. He knew he had won. He had used my love for Leo to break my will. "Objection!" Sarah shouted from the lawyer's table, her voice cracking with desperation. "Your Honor, my client is being coerced. We need more time." Bam! Judge Davies' gavel sounded like an execution pistol. Attorney Sarah, I'm giving you a final warning. If you continue to disrupt the proceedings, I will hold you in contempt of court. Defendant, please continue. I looked over at Bronson. He was leaning against the wall behind the prosecution, his right hand resting casually on the holster at his hip. A satisfied smile curled the corner of his mouth. He and Hank, two demons in human form, had won. Justice had been crushed where it should have been. I closed my eyes. In that darkness, I saw Martha. She was standing in the corner, wearing her favorite floral dress, her face streaked with tears. She said nothing, just looked at me with eyes filled with pain. I'm sorry, Martha, I whispered in my mind. I failed. I didn't keep Whispering Pines. I let them take it all. I took a deep breath, preparing to say the words that would bury me forever. I was doing this for Leo, for the nephew Martha loved more than life itself. I want to plead guilty. I killed. Bam! The main door to the courtroom suddenly swung open with such force that it shook the old oak walls. The sound tore through the dead silence, causing everyone, including Judge Davies, to turn around in surprise. A bright light poured in from the hallway, and in that light, a figure appeared. No, not one, many. It wasn't Leo who walked in. It was a man in a gray suit, his face stern, his hand holding up a shiny gold badge. FBI, Agent Howard. This hearing is adjourned immediately. Following him were not the local police, but a camera crew from Bozeman TV with red camera lights streaming live. The courtroom exploded. Judge Davies banged his gavel repeatedly in frustration. Hank jumped up, his face drained of color. Bronson instinctively reached for his holster, but was immediately flanked by two other agents. We have new evidence, Agent Howard said loudly, his voice echoing through the room. A video was automatically sent to our office this morning from a secure cloud account. Leo. The kid didn't just save the video. He had installed a kill switch. If he didn't log in after 24 hours, the video would be automatically sent everywhere. It used its own disappearance as a trigger for the truth bomb. The big screen in the courtroom lit up, and there, in vivid detail, was the scene Hank and Bronson thought they had buried forever. Hank handed over the envelope of money. Bronson took it with a greedy smile, and the fateful words, "Take care of the old man and Jerry." The courtroom erupted in horror. Hank screamed and rushed toward the exit, but he didn't get far. Two police officers, who weren't on Bronson's side, tackled him to the floor. "No, he did it. Bronson made me do it," Hank yelled, pointing at his co-defendant. "You're lying. You hired me." Bronson roared back, his cold mask cracking, revealing the utter panic of being handcuffed by his own subordinates. The evil alliance fell apart right before everyone's eyes. Justice, after so many days of obscurity, finally burst forth in a glorious burst. The charges against me were dismissed immediately. As I walked out of the courthouse, the Montana afternoon sun shone brightly, warmer and brighter than ever, and there, standing next to Sarah, was Leo. He rushed forward and hugged me. I held him tight, feeling the strong heartbeat of life, of the future. "Let's go home, Grandpa," Leo said, tears of joy streaming down my cheeks. I looked out at the distant mountains, where whispering pines awaited. "Yes, let's go home." They thought they could bury the truth under the soil of my farm, but they forgot that soil is where everything grows. I am old, my hands shake, but as long as I stand on this land, as long as this resilient blood flows in the veins of my children and grandchildren, justice will never sleep.